to Foster My Stories, the achievement-focused podcast for foster care, adoption, orphan, inclusive of underserved communities. I'm your host, Shalina Michelle Tate, and on today's cast episode, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. John DeGarmo, director of the Foster Care Institute. Dr. DeGarmo, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me here on Foster My Stories. Gracefully chosen listeners, we have a special guest expert here with Dr. John DeGarmo. Dr. DeGarmo, could you tell the listeners, before becoming the founding director of that dynamic institute, how was your upbringing?
Thank you for asking. I came from a traditional family, mother and father. I had a very good childhood. I met my wife traveling the world. We moved to Australia for several years, and at that point, our first child died of a condition called anencephaly. That really set me down a dark hole, which eventually led me to becoming a foster parent.
I'm sorry for that loss, but I also commend even the effort to want to go into foster care. When your child passed, was that an immediate thought, or that was like a stirring in your heart to go that direction?
No, it wasn't immediate. In fact, I never really thought about being a foster parent. I really believed lots of misconceptions that so many societies believe. It wasn't really until several years later, after actually the birth of 3 more children, that I entertained the idea of becoming a foster parent. I was teaching in a rural school setting at that time in middle Georgia, and I noticed a lot of kids coming to my classrooms who had issues of behavior and academics and attendance. And I kept asking myself, what's going on? Why are there so many children in this rural area?
Yes.
I met many of their birth parents, and I recognized, it starts in the home. So I approached my wife and thought, we had lost our first child. How can we help other kids? And that's where foster parenting started. And since then, we've had over 60 wonderful children come through our family.
Yes, I read that, and that's part of your amazing testimony. Could you tell the listeners just about the different children that you had? I know there's different types of foster care, like in kind, but that's with the family. Then you have therapeutic, you have respite. What kind of foster care did you provide?
Oh, gosh. We really provided all of it. So we've had children as young as 27 hours old, 18 years of age.
Wow.
We've had children with a variety of disorders and
Yes.
anxieties. We've had different groups of 5. We've provided respite.
Yes.
We've had many children, actually many babies and infants going through withdrawals of drug symptoms when they were first born. We really had the opportunity to care for a variety of children.
Yes, your TED Talk really moved me. I watched it, and just your testimony about your daughter. Could you tell listeners who don't know about that journey, about actually having a little girl and how that happened?
Sure, I'll share briefly, and then others can go and watch that TED Talk. And I did that TED Talk really to bring awareness to foster care and what the children go through. This one child in particular came to us when she was 7 years of age. She came to us, her mother was suffering from drug addictions. Her father was never really in the picture. He was a child predator. The child was living with her grandmother at the time, who was suffering from her own issues of alcoholism. And the 7-year-old came to us. She could not even read or write her own name, so far behind academically. She was with us for almost 2 years, and we were trying to adopt her. And she went to live with her aunt and uncle in another state, whom she'd only met once in her life. We were given very short notice, really about 24-hour notice we were given. Sadly, years later, when she tried to find us, she had already been placed into a children's mental health hospital because she had been raped over and over again by people she was living with, her aunt and uncle, their stepson. And it spiraled down further, and sadly, she's not doing well. In her early 20s now. You can get the full version of my TED Talk. So that's something that drives me every day. I can't allow it to happen to any children again.
Listeners, please, when you get a chance to visit Dr. John DeGarmo, fostercare.com. There you will find content from his speeches, and that particular one is on the main page. Please go watch it. To hear her testimony is very heartbreaking, and unfortunately, that happens on a regular basis. And what struck home for me even more is when you said the system failed her, and that was so true. When children go into foster care, and hopefully with adoption, the hopes is that they find loving homes that's going to really do right by them and care for them. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Sometimes biological family may clean up and take them back in, but that may not have been the best placement to go back to, and then they end up worse than where they were. When you said the system, that really got me. When you said the system failed, that really added for the awareness to be more.
Well, yeah, that's what drives me. I can't afford to let it happen again. It drives me, and the system did fail her. Sadly, it's failed many children. This is a system that is created by human beings, and of course, no human is perfect. And there's 50 different states, which means there's 50 different ways of doing foster care. So everyone has his own policies, procedures, and rules and regulations. And of course, you have a system that is overwhelmed. Caseworkers and agencies today are overwhelmed.
Yes.
underpaid, understaffed right now
Yes.
because of COVID. So it's very much struggling, and sadly the children suffer as a result.
Yes, sir. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I, for a season, had the opportunity to work as a administrative temp in North Carolina foster agency. Just being around the other end of it, paperwork, social workers, and what goes into it from that perspective. Like you said, it's overworked and overwhelmed, really, and understaffed, and not enough resources, manpower, if you want to say. You and your wife have taken in over 60 children, and I also see where you've adopted 3. Could you tell listeners about that journey of deciding to move into adoption? How was that for you and your family?
Challenge to be sure when we started the adoption process, and it certainly wasn't something I intended to do. We didn't set out to become foster parents to adopt.
Yes.
We set out to become foster parents to help children in crisis. But these 3 children in particular, the parental rights were terminated,
Okay.
and they came up for adoption. Now there were some hurdles in adopting all 3 of these children. In fact, we've had 4 failed adoptions. In my house, there's no label, there's no foster child, adopted child, or biological children.
Yes.
They're all my children, and we love them with all of our heart.
I commend you saying that. I definitely can relate to being in homes where it's a clear separation between biological and foster. And so just to hear you touch on the fact that in your home, everyone's equal, everyone's a family.
When I became a foster parent, I never really planned on this road. It wasn't until I got my doctorate in foster care studies much later, started speaking at events, and I recognized the need for such an institute. Foster parents, not many organizations out there that provide the resources, support that foster parents need that we provide. I bring to the table something different that many others don't. Not only have I done all the studies and written all the books and collected all the data, but I've also lived the lifestyle of a foster parent to over 60 plus children. So I bring 2 different viewpoints, if you will. But again, it wasn't that something I certainly intended to do. I went to college to become a teacher, but I've also done other things as well, career-wise. This is just something that evolved, and I think that God led me to as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, was it more of a divine? I feel like it was more of a divine calling, which you kind of recognized there, how it just went that way. And you're right. Yes. And a lot of times in our lives, that's so true. We do plan to go one direction. We start to learn that we have purposes and callings in our lives. And it sounds like God really prepared you for that direction.
Very much did. He very much did. Again, I never set out to be a foster parent. I think that was something that God has led me to and placed on my heart to help these children. He's also given me the opportunity to have these children in my home to come join my family. And every child made me a better person in some way. So it was very much, I firmly believe this is part of God's plan for me.
Yes, and I definitely see here where you say basically your regrouping routine, it kind of keeps you grounded, is prayer, gardening, and spending time with friends and hobbies, and all of those things help. Once again, I just commend you and your for just doing, in my eyes, the dynamic, because the reality, the sad reality is a lot of people don't want to be bothered, and unfortunately there's continued need to care for these children, and then also the right way. You know, it's one thing to put them in the home, but to make sure they're in the best home, and then there's one thing to adopt them, but make sure they're with the right family. And if they return to their family, for them not to end up in a worse state. I see as well that your vision for progress going into the future is to bring more awareness and advocacy for the issue of foster care and human trafficking. Could you explain to the listeners a little bit more about that? Because I also am aware that that is a real situation that's rarely talked about.
Oh, sure. Many children in foster care end up victims of human trafficking. Children in foster care, no one wants to be a foster child.
Yeah.
They don't want that. So many of them, particularly those kids in middle school and high school, and even younger than that, they go on social media to try to escape their situation. And they go there also to look for something, and that is to be accepted, that's to be normal, and that's to find someone to love them. Yes. And the predators recognize that. They recognize and lurk for these vulnerable children and lure them in with false promises and false hopes. And children in foster care want to believe. They want to believe that someone really likes them. They want to believe that they're normal. They want to believe that they're loved. So many of them will sadly end up victims of human trafficking. I also want to bring awareness to issues of foster care as well. I believe that while not everybody can be a foster parent, everybody can help a child in crisis some way. And when we have over 425,000 children in foster care, and we have over 300,000 children who are victims of human trafficking, those mean that this is happening in every community in our nation.
I thank you for even bringing awareness to that, because if the awareness is spread, no one can say that they never knew, or they can never just use the excuse of, okay, well, it's not my situation. And so the reality for me, coming from foster care and kind of having a crash course through going into the real world, was the root of rejection and looking for love, looking for acceptance. And that's so true. A lot of children that come out, who are emancipated out or choose to leave, they run into the predators often, or they end up on the street, teenage pregnancy, incarcerated. Unfortunately, the statistics. I'm just happy to hear that you as a leader is making the strides to make a difference in what statistics say for these children. I wanted to highlight as well his books, which is also found on his website. That is Dr. John DeGarmo, fostercare.com. Some of his books include The Little Book of Foster Care Wisdom. It is 365 days of inspiration and encouragement for foster care families, and God's Call to Growing Epidemic, the Church and Foster Care. I believe that's a dynamic book, especially from faith standpoint, especially if you are a family of faith. And then the Foster Care Survival Guide, 3 of the many that he has. Dr. DeGarmo, other than books and really just being a leader all over, are there any other programs or any projects you're working on to add to your efforts to help these children?
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. I'm working with a celebrity actress, Jen Lilly. She's famous for her films and Hallmark Channel. She's also a foster and adoptive parent. We've been meeting with legislators in Washington, D.C. about foster care reform, and her and I are working on a few projects as well. And there's some other things I'm doing as well to move forward advocacy for foster care.
Very happy to hear that as well, that there are, from a real standpoint, that there are celebrities out there, really public figures out there that's still wanting to make a difference, and they themselves are also foster and are adoptive. Dr. DeGarmo, before we go, are there any words of wisdom that you're wanting to give anyone aspiring to be a foster or adoptive parent, or just in general make a difference for these children?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, there's 425,000 children in foster care, which means it happens in every neighborhood and community in our nation. And while not everybody can be a foster parent, we each can help the child in some way where we live. That might be serving as a mentor for children, tutor at school. Maybe it's supplying school supplies. Maybe it's providing backpacks filled with hygiene items.
Yes.
Maybe teaching those who are ready to transition out life skills, or offering them job opportunities. Once again, every one of us can help a child in crisis in some way.
Yes, and I agree wholeheartedly. Once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come here on Foster My Stories. Honored to have you here. I would say you are a super expert, because not only are you an expert in the field, you are definitely a leader making countless strides. Just having you here has really been an honor. Gracefully chosen listeners, you can catch Foster My Stories every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you would like to be a guest on Foster My Stories as a featured community or special guest expert, you can inbox Gracefully Chosen 2020 Facebook page, and you can catch new episode Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time via Red Circle Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Audible, Radio Public, and Google Podcasts. And remember, being foster, adoption, orphan, and underserved simply means you're gracefully chosen. Take care.